Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's Research America Alliance discussion. I'm Jenny LeRae, Vice President for Strategy and Communications. Thank you so much for joining us and for your organization's partnership with Research America. I'd be remiss if I did not say that if your organization is not a member, we hope you'll join us. My colleague, Anna Platt, would be more than happy to connect with you. And her email is in the chat, and she hopes, and so do I, that you will get in touch. So our special guest today is Clay Alspach, who is the principal at Leavitt Partners and a former chief health counsel of the House Energy and Commerce Committee. We've asked Clay to provide an update on the status of the PDUFA reauthorization. I think he's also going to talk about the medical device bill. And you know, the timing of this conversation just couldn't be better, Clay, as the ENC, your old committee, released their draft of the user fee bills yesterday. And while the Senate has yet to release their draft, the bipartisan compromise in the ENC bill tells us a lot about where we're headed. So Clay, I'm going to turn it over to you, and I know we'll have plenty of questions afterwards. Thanks so much for being with us.
Well, thank you for the invitation. I love talking about the FDA user fees. So looking forward to a great discussion today. I'll try to keep my comments limited so we have plenty of time for questions and discussion. This is the agenda for today, what I'll do, and please don't be worried. I'm not going to go on and drone on forever, but just a basic, hopefully this will help as we walk through, give a basic background on the user fees, talk through the usual reauthorization process. I have usual in italics because every user fee is a little bit different. So we just have to keep that in mind. The ENC draft came out yesterday. Big congrats to the committee for the bipartisan release of the draft. A huge step in the process. Jenny, you're 100% right. Bipartisanship is such a key component of the user fees. It has always been bipartisan at Energy and Commerce and Senate Help, and glad to see that continuing. We'll go through a little bit about what's in it and then talk through next steps and then leave plenty of time for discussion. So in terms of the process update, I think most of you all will be really familiar with this, so I'll try to keep it short, but every 5 years, we go through this process now of the reauthorization of the FDA user fees. These user fees are increasingly a huge component of the FDA budget, a budget that is critical to just overseeing, so much of our US economy. I think it's like a quarter of it. I forget the specific statistic, but it's a critical piece. And these funds go toward the employees, to the programs that enable the medical products and the to move forward through the agency. And so this is a critical step, one where, as much as we'll talk about riders and other policies, the core user fees are the reason why we're here. And I think that's something that shouldn't escape us as we have this discussion today. It is the job of Congress, the administration, of the stakeholders to get this done on time, because if that were not to happen, we don't want to get to that place. Let's not even discuss it. But also not getting done on time. I think another critical thing to relay is that on time is not September 30th of 2022. That is, I know we all procrastinate. Congress always procrastinates, right? They always work on deadlines. But this is one where I would argue the real deadline is the end of July, because if you get into August, that's where we get a discussion of pink slips and the possibility of pink slips being sent to FDA employees who have been through increased challenges and and helped us, but because of the pandemic and gotten us through the pandemic. We don't want anybody to have to go through that. No, not only just a policy discussion about issuing these pink slips, but also about the personal consequences of that and issues that would cause. And so really where Congress tries to move is to get this done by the end of July. So that question, it doesn't even come into play. And as you would have seen with FDASIA in 2012 and with FDARA in 2017, they were able to accomplish that, or almost accomplish that, where those pink slips were not issued. There are four main components, four main user fee programs that have come to be. The first is PDUFA, which is just the reason why we're here, the user fee program that got this all started. And then gradually through the process, the medical device user fee came forward, generic drug user fee, and the biosimilar user fee. So when we talk about UFAs, that's what we're talking about. So this is a slide to kind of walk through what I alluded to earlier. What is the usual, basically, FDA user fee process? I say usual because even this slide is somewhat inaccurate because of what has happened in this user fee cycle. One of those is FDA commitment letters under statute. They're due January 15th. That is when FDA is supposed to, HHS is supposed to get that to the Hill. That didn't happen this time because of the medical device negotiations. And so that is one complicating factor that Congress is having to deal with. You have heard of just from the chairs and rankers at Energy and Commerce and Health Committee about their displeasure around the fact that it wasn't on time. Why they're not pleased is that they're under a tight cycle, right? And a tight process for how quickly they can move this. And they'll do their due diligence and they'll put their effort and their earnestness around it. But some of the hurdles that come forward are just hurdles that come forward as part of any legislative process. So they need as much time as possible to review the agreements, get them in the legislative text and move that forward. And so that's kind of why that displeasure came to be. Where we are right now, and I'll just kind of walk through what we're in the legislative hearings phase, now moving to markup. So the Energy and Commerce, as you can see, there are more boxes on the Energy and Commerce side because they do go through a health subcommittee. They go through the subcommittee, then full committee usually with most bills. The health committee just doesn't have to do that. So it's an extra process step. But it's one where great news is it looks like both committees, as I'll talk about, are on the verge of moving through that markup process. What happens after that is basically on the House side. I would argue worked on the House side as Chief Health Counsel there, where it's an easier process. I would argue the reason for that is, and this is something we'll just have to watch over the next few weeks, is that usually the suspension and the suspension authority is a way to expedite things in the House, whereas on the Senate floor, every bill faces the bottleneck of the Senate floor, which is the most precious commodity in the Senate is floor time. And so that is just a challenge that the Help Committee leaders always have to face is trying to get floor time or trying to basically get 100 votes, get unanimous consent to move a bill forward. So what will happen though is the committees will navigate, the leaders will navigate the House floor and Senate floor, and then they'll come together on informal negotiations where they'll take the legislation that's been reported by the House, reported by the Senate, and basically try to come up with an agreement, bicameral agreement, bipartisan agreement that would enable them to move forward. This isn't why I have informal in quotes. This isn't a formal basically conference. What we're seeing with the Innovation Act, USICA, whatever the current name of it is right now, that we're going through right now around that bill that will be a formal conference. This is informal. So the staff will work together, Help Committee staff, Energy and Commerce staff, along with their leadership on the House and Senate to basically come together on a deal. From there, what the process has usually followed is that they will basically take it to the House floor first. The House will use a suspension authority, usually clear it through, and then it'll go to the Senate floor for passage and then go to President Biden for signature. The goal, of course, is to get this done, as I mentioned, by the end of July. Sometimes this does seep into August. In 2007, this got really late into where it was the end of September before that latter part of the process occurred. So hopefully that's a helpful overview of kind of what we can expect and what we've seen and what we can expect in terms of the usual reauthorization process. From there, we talked about earlier and Jenny talked about, is that the great news is we do have a draft legislative package from Energy and Commerce Committee. As you all know, this is the product of a significant amount of work, both public and private, behind the scenes that got them to this point. From the public side, we've seen the FDA. We shouldn't discount the work that happened between industry and FDA to come up with the commitment letters and to put those forward. We had the public meetings as well as the engagement by FDA with stakeholders around that. And then also, like as it came forward in the Hill, part of the legislative process, We saw the testimony at the hearings at Health Committee and Energy and Commerce Committee, and then with the behind the scenes negotiations over not only the base user fee packages, but also the question on just what the riders would look like. And let's just move right there. So what happened, what we saw yesterday from the Energy and Commerce Committee, it's a draft bill. It's led by Chair Eshoo and Ranking Member Guthrie. They're the chair and ranking member of the Health Subcommittee and Energy and Commerce Committee. And what you're seeing in this draft is basically the 4 user fee reauthorizations, which are the core, the reason why we're here, that those have to get done, as well as the riders. The riders is always a big subject of conversation, and it's interesting how that comes to be, and that I think it's the novelty of them. Usually, the environmental circumstances are what gives rise to what actually gets in a user fee bill versus not, but accelerated approval, right, has been a big issue, a big discussion among the health community. And so that is one of the components, one of the provisions that has been included as part of this legislative package. Clinical trial diversity has been a significant priority for stakeholders and for policymakers. There are provisions included in the user fee and this user fee draft on that topic. Inspections has also been a really big topic. There's an entire title devoted to inspections as part of this. What's interesting is you see this throughout the bills that come forward. This inspection idea, sometimes it's around global inspections. That was in 2012. There was a lot of work done around just foreign inspections. I think inspections is a big issue, or has become a big topic, just because of one of the reasons is the pandemic, right? And just the issues around the pandemic and trying to do inspections, as well as just inspections and what they do in terms of the amount of work it takes for those being inspected. So those are some of the provisions included. And then there are just some provisions, some policies that always get included every 5 years that they don't get talked about a lot, save for the discussion around the user fee and these user fee legislative packages, but they get included. And so that's, you're seeing a lot of that as part of the draft as well. And so I think that this is very much a draft. And so they want input. They're going to want for folks to read through the text and to help them know that they accomplished what they want to accomplish. And this is something that it's interesting, where there'll be pushes from different stakeholders to get other policies added, right? Additional riders added, maybe some changes to different components. And I would say it is very much a negotiation until you get into that conference with House and Senate, until that's reported out. There's different policies that could come in. One example I'll give is breakthrough therapy designation, which has been an incredible success. That was a late addition on the House side, as an example. And so there is more work to be done. And so that is just one thought as well as around this, is that we'll just have to be diligent. We have to be diligent and vigilant in watching this package as it moves forward, just as there will be other policies that may come in and may come out as it moves forward through the legislative process. So with that, I'll just go through and we can kind of talk through next steps and get to the discussion piece. Energy and Commerce, they're going to move forward with their markups. So they're going to do the subcommittee markup. It looks like next Wednesday is when the expectation is, and then they'll move forward to full committee markup the following week. There's a lot of work ahead, just in terms of having to educate and talk to their members. They've done a lot of that work already, but it looks like those markups are in good shape, and they'll be in good shape to be able to report it out of Energy and Commerce by Memorial Day. The Help Committee, the expectation is that they'll move forward shortly as well. And so they've done, just as in parallel with E&C, they've done a lot of work, and they're compiling those pieces. And so they'll be able to come forward with a draft. One thing is that draft, I guarantee is going to be different, the Energy and Commerce, right? That will represent the priorities of Chair Murray and Ranking Member Burr, as well as their members. And so there'll be additional policies that get added. One of those policies, as one example, could be valid. It's a diagnostic reform that has been the subject of a lot of discussion over a number of years. And so I think I know that the bill sponsors, we know that the bill sponsors and then the committee on the Senate side has been working very diligently on that. So I think that's one that folks are watching really closely. There'll be other pieces too. And you could go and look at an accelerated approval as one example where they may take a different approach to it. And so that'll be really interesting for us to watch, as whether it's in clinical trial diversity, accelerated approval, or inspections, you name it, they may take a different approach. And it's a healthy exercise, because when they do come together in a conference, it makes for a really good substantive discussion on what the best policy is. And frankly, it helps the policy that comes out of that to be much, much better. So I've kind of talked about this. There's a great deal of work that has already been done, but there's a lot of work to happen in the next few months as they try to move this to a conclusion. We'll say, though, the potential hurdles are there as well. I think as we see in this environment, there's just, you never know when you get on that what story will break or what issue may present itself. There are sometimes issues that you think are bills that are slam dunks, where like at the COVID funding, the $10 billion, we all thought that was going to get done. Unfortunately, it's run into some hurdles that were unforeseen and have prevented that from going forward. And so that is something that will need to help, frankly, the ENC and help, is that the quicker they can get this done and the more stakeholder support that can be there to educate, both in terms of at the committee, but as well as in a broader House and Senate, I think it's going to be absolutely critical. The earlier they can get this done, the faster these policies can be implemented, the more assured FDA and the stakeholder community can be that the reauthorization will have gotten done and will have gotten done on time and in a good way. And frankly, I think the less hurdles that will be there, because every day that it's out there, the more the possibility of some kind of wrinkle coming up. So thank you so much for the opportunity. Thank you for listening, and look forward to any questions you have and a discussion as well. So thank you.
Thanks, Clay. As always, very succinct and clear. Let's talk a little bit about the language on accelerated approval. Chairman Pallone had legislation, and there was also legislation on the Republican side, and yet they were able to come to a compromise. Can you describe kind of the outlines of what the accelerated approval language is in the bill reported yesterday?
Yeah, I can do a basic overview of it. I think there's a couple things to think about with accelerated approval. One is, and I think it's an important point around the language and frankly the policy discussion around these issues, where sometimes it's the legislative text. And a lot of times the legislative text is incredibly important, and that's the case here. But it's also, I would argue, sometimes the implications and consequences of even having this discussion and what it does. So what I mean by that is the fact that we're having this discussion around accelerated approval right now, and it's being raised, I think arguably will have implications for how accelerated approval will be utilized by the agency, no matter what's in the text here, because that, knowing that there's congressional spotlight, there's stakeholder spotlight on that and the utilization of that authority, there's going to be, I think there's some questions as to how FDA is actually going to implement that, because there could be, as with any language that's put forward, there could be questions on how it'll be implemented. But I think that's just one consideration I think we need to look at with accelerated, in that I would argue and just I would hope that it's not going to stilt or inhibit FDA from utilizing it in a lot of areas where it could be and has been incredibly beneficial, right? We've seen that with HIV, we've seen that with cancer, oncology, we've seen that and seen that just how it's helped. And so just would put that forward. In terms of the language, yeah, it has come back from where Pallone was and where he put forward his original draft. And that's been interesting, because we saw two different versions, right? The Pallone version, as well as Ranking Member Leader Rogers putting that forward as well. And so I would just say this is going to be an ongoing process in terms of kind of where this will land eventually, because we can look at it now, and I think we need to, do a deeper dive and kind of where the interpretations are coming forward. We know the Senate's going to have that too. But I think this is where it's key for stakeholders to opine and come in on kind of how they view this language when it's implemented, because again, it will have significant implications for patient communities, as well as I think that it could change, Frank, as we move forward in the Senate. They meet the Senate. The other one I just want to raise too is this continuing, and I know it's been an issue that Research America has talked a lot about, is about real world evidence, right? And real world evidence, and I think that it will be interesting to see kind of how that interweaves with the accelerated approval and just the utilization of some of these expedited programs. Thankfully, there's been a ton of work that's been done by just the policymakers as well as by the stakeholder community to better understand the role of real world evidence. And I would hope those discussions can continue. It does seem to have should have a large role, or should have a role as part of accelerated approval, especially when you get into considerations on accelerated approval around just ethical issues, where you have some of these treatments that could be, or products that could be approved under accelerated approval, where patient access and the need to enable that access and not having to go through a real world evidence may be a better way to better understand the effectiveness of a product rather than some of the traditional approaches. So that'll be an interesting, I know that's been a priority for, it's a priority for a lot of members. And so I'll be interested to see how that moves forward, especially as these considerations of accelerated approval and expedited programs go forward as part of this process.
Thanks, Clay. I was going to ask you about real world evidence, so I'm glad you raised it. We'll put a link in the chat shortly, but I noticed that Duke Margolis is doing a day-long program, which is really it looks like it's really going to look at the progress that's been made around real world evidence, what we know, what we don't know, and some best use cases. So I'm looking forward to that.
And they've been incredibly help. They've done so much thought leadership there. So I'm happy to hear that they're moving that forward.
Yeah. You mentioned breakthrough therapy, the big breakthrough therapy designation, and I thought it might be helpful if you could just briefly explain the difference between that and accelerated approval.
Right. I mean, the reason why breakthrough, so 505 of the Food, Drug, Cosmetic Act provides a lot of flexibility, frankly, for FDA related to how they can approve drugs. And one of the attractive features of breakthrough therapy designation, as it was considered in 2012 and it's moved forward, is frankly because there are arguments around breakthrough therapy that it could have been done without it even coming forward. But the leadership of FDA thought it would be very helpful. And it's proven, I think, to be, in my view, it's been proven to be true because of senior level involvement and the ability to frankly come in where there's efficacy being shown very early, whether in phase 2 or others, to be able to move those products through. So I would argue one of the key differences just from almost like a cultural leadership perspective, where they're able to come in from that leadership standpoint and move those products through in a way where without that, they couldn't do that. Accelerated approval, where that has come forward is around the utilization of surrogate endpoints, right? So you don't have to, and so that's where the surrogate endpoint discussion comes through, and that's where I think that'll be centered around as we kind of move that forward, and how those post-approval trials will be utilized to kind of prove that endpoint. But breakthrough, that was where that was what was so attractive about it. And I think that we've seen that's been proven true in the last 10 years since the enactment of that provision.
Thanks, Blake. That's a helpful distinction. I think we have some questions from the audience, so I'm going to invite my colleague Anna Platt to join us.
Yes, thanks, Jenny. And as a reminder to folks, please feel free to put your questions in the Q&A or the chat, and we will do our best to ask them. So Clay, one question that's come in, this person's asking, can you offer your perspectives or thoughts on whether there will be any legislative efforts to enhance communication between FDA and CMS? Oh, and I think you're still muted.
Yeah, I just put on mute. Sorry about that.
No problem.
It's a really great question. I think there is a communication related provision, I believe, in the discussion draft. I think I saw, and but it's because it's been a big priority for Ranking Member Guthrie, just around because communications and the lack of communications, especially around what manufacturers can communicate, has been a significant problem. I would argue, one could argue, around just helping payers, including public payers, Medicaid, others, to understand like what's coming through the pipeline and what may be there. One of the things, though, I would just say when CMS, that whole CMS FDA discussion, anytime you're implicating a CMS as part of the FDA user fees, you're going to get to questions of jurisdiction and questions where it's not unsurmountable, but it's an additional process step that may make it a little more difficult. So that was the FDA CMS communication is a component of cures that representatives to get Upton is a really big priority. And so that's still, they're working hard to move that policy through. But I think specific FDA CMS communication, that's one where I think it is an area where policymakers are interested, and I know there could be a lot of good work done. It just may be a little more difficult in this context, just due to the jurisdictional challenges that sometimes arise where when you get into some of the mandatory programs around this.
Got it. Thank you for that. Another question that's come in, you mentioned the VALID Act as a bill that would be attached to PDUFA. Are there other bills that you've heard mentioned, bipartisan bills, that lawmakers may try to add? You talked about riders, but what about bills that are already in existence?
Yeah, absolutely. And so what you see in the draft that was put out by Energy and Commerce Committee, they had a hearing on riders, right? So a lot of those were introduced bills. Some of them were in draft form, but they were almost there. Those were here. I think on the Senate side, you will see you'll see some of the legislation that's been introduced, similar to what they did around the pandemic legislation. They utilized this in the past, where you'll see bipartisan senators put that forward. Those are really strong candidates to be included. So I think the answer is there could be others that are put forward. This is a fluid process, and so introduced bills arguably have a stronger likelihood of getting added or could get added, bipartisan introduced bills, than others. I think that is definitely one part of the rubric that Pallone and Leader Rogers, Morris Rogers have put forward, is this whole idea of bipartisanship. They want them to be. So I think those are likely candidates or could be candidates. Obviously, the administration's thoughts on these policies is really big part too. Haven't really mentioned that, but FDA does weigh in very heavily here, where they'll provide technical assistance. They'll provide their and HHS as well. They will provide their thoughts and opine on different policies to make them better, or just why they should be supported. VALID is one. Other areas are where I know they're coming in and providing that assistance, and so you can expect that they will be a huge part of this process. As much as it's not public, there's a lot of work happening behind the scenes from them.
Clay, I'm going to jump in. I wanted to ask about patient-focused drug development, because so much progress has been made. Did it show up in the House draft? Where do you think that's going to come up during this process?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's been an area of significant, I think, and great work by stakeholder community as well as by FDA and others in moving forward since 2012, when it was part of the PDUFA, basically the base agreement. And that's where you've seen additional work, whether it was in the base agreements to like 21st Century Cures, there was additional work on that. There is significant, as much as we talk about the riders, there's significant policy benefit that comes forward because of the base agreements. And those base agreements do include work on patient-focused drug development. They include just other really helpful and really there will be, I think, influential policies related to cell and gene therapy, additional resources for CBER in that. And so that's where, as much as we'll be kind of focused on the riders and what's in there, there'll be patient-focused drug development, other areas that are included as part of the base agreement, that commitment letter, where significant resources are coming forward. And so that is a strong reason, I think, for a lot of patients and patient stakeholders to be supportive of this and to help move it through.
Great, thank you, Clay. Another question that has come in, what about orphan drug exclusivity reform? This person is saying, Senators Cassidy and Baldwin mentioned thoughts of inclusion, but no text in last week's HELP hearing. Have you heard any thoughts or discussion of that on the House side?
Yeah, it's a great question. So we're all still moving through the draft, but I know that there's reauthorization of orphan drug grants as part of the discussion draft. I think that's the extent of it, but again, I'm still kind of moving through a review of it, but it's good to know that that's on people's radars right now.
We have an interesting comment from one of our participants who said that they served on a patient-focused drug development panel for narcolepsy in 2013, and they believe it really drove industry into their space. We have a lot more medication choices and potential drugs in the pipeline because of it. So just wanted to share that. Thanks for that observation. I wanted to just make a point about the FDA Appropriations, which was not the topic of this, but it is something that we care about, and we work closely with the Alliance for a Stronger FDA. Look like the administration has requested a 10% increase, and we're going along with that. Clay, anything you want to comment on in terms of the importance of not forgetting about the approach side of this?
Yes, absolutely. So I think the approach side is incredibly important here, because I think as we go through, but one of the reasons I will just say that the user fees are so even more critical in gaining importance is because they're a higher percentage or a bigger proportion of the money of the funding, right? And I think the whole idea of the user fees was that there would be increased amount of money that would come from appropriations as with the user fees too. And so I would just say those efforts are just really important in order to ensure the FDA has its resources in order to do its job. And then we'll just say, I think there is a provision actually, and it's Section 811 that relates to basically clarifying application of exclusive approval, certification, or licensure for drugs designated for rare diseases or conditions. So would just point that out to the question earlier, where in addition to those orphan drug grants, I believe that actually pertains to the question that came in from the on orphan drugs too. So happy to give it a read, but a further read, but just want to flag that, Anna.
Great, thank you for that, Clay. Jenny, I know we're right at time almost, so I'm not seeing any more audience questions, so I'll turn it back to you.
All right, Clay. Just one more point, which I think you'll want to jump in on, which is that it's great that we have a bipartisan bill coming out of Energy and Commerce, but we still have a long way to go. And maybe this is a rhetorical question, but would you agree with me that advocates need to continue to make sure this really gets to the finish line? Because as we get closer to the deadline, we also get closer to the midterms.
Absolutely agree 100%. And there's I think there are a couple of reasons for that. One is there are a lot of new members who who may not be familiar with the user fee or what it even is, right? And so that hearing from their constituents who will be directly affected and why it's important to get this done, that does have a huge helps education, but helps move them in the direction where they will want to support it and help move it through. The second piece is, I mean, in terms of, I can just point like firsthand where if you look at why 21st Century Cures got done, why the other pieces got done, it's because of the patient stakeholders weighing in and driving that. And you all are incredibly influential and important to members of Congress, senators, and members of the House. And so we just say it is time. Like sometimes you're like, is this really going to make a difference? It does. It makes a huge difference. We wouldn't be here. We wouldn't have 21st century cures, other pieces of legislation without that. So I would just encourage everybody, if you can, to reach out to help build support and move this forward.
And you're right, there is a lot of misunderstanding and just plain, lack of familiarity. We have a fact sheet that we're going to touch up a little based on this conversation, but we'll be sending it out to everyone who joined the call today. And I think that'll be a helpful, item that folks can take with them to the Hill. And then also, Clay, we'll be sharing your slides online. Thank you so much. It's always great to talk with you and hear your perspective and your insights. I'm just going to quickly mention that we have an event coming up. Let's see, next Tuesday, May 10th at 11 a.m. Eastern, we'll be having a conversation with Dr. Robert Valdez, who's the director of the Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality. And we know that health services research helps improve patient care and target funds to what works best. So we know that's going to be a really worthwhile discussion, and a link to register is in the chat now. Thanks so much for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you again soon.